Hello and welcome back to MaxBlack. Today we have an incredibly important conversation, not just on leadership, but on inclusive leadership. And with us to talk about that today are two incredible experts, Avis Waninger and Vonda Page. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Wonderful. Glad to have you.
Hi, Dr. Avis. So good to be here.
Good to have you. Now, Vonda, we'll start with you. Can you introduce yourself and tell people what you do?
Absolutely. My name is Vonda Page, and I am the Radical Results Mentor for leaders looking to level up and managers making moves. So I work with decision makers with real challenges who are really ready to step up and meet the moment. And I do that through mentorships, masterminds, and master classes.
I love that. And Amy?
My name's Avis Waninger, and I'm the CEO of Lead at Any Level. We work with companies that promote from within to help transform their reclusive nerds into inclusive leaders so they can keep their employees and keep them engaged.
I love it. So, Amy, let me just start off with asking you a couple of questions because it seems like right now it's a very challenging time for organizations. I mean, we are kind of whiplashing between the Great Resignation to quiet quitting to still challenges. Obviously, we never will free ourselves probably of challenges dealing with inclusion. You know, how can you help managers do a better job of not only just barely keeping their workforce, but making sure that the environment that they ferment are healthy environments for those employees?
Sure. So when people get promoted into leadership roles, typically it's because they're really good at their technical jobs and not because they know how to do the people part of the role. And so what I help leaders do is tap into the people side of leadership. How do they manage change for themselves so they can lead others through it? How do they give and receive feedback effectively so they're watering all the plants in the garden, not just the ones that are closest to them? How do they build relationships with people across difference so they can expand their own perspectives and make decisions not from a place of comfort, but really taking the best decision for the most people as much of the time as possible, and factoring that into their leadership. I really believe that leaders can be anywhere and should be everywhere, and there's no time to start like the present.
It sure isn't. I completely agree. And Vonda, with the crisis that we've been having for, forever in this country around race, around really building spaces and environments that really are free as much as possible from discrimination and provide people with opportunity, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges we're struggling right now in the intersection of this sort of post-George Floyd era and also the rising sort of tensions with regards to the lingering culture that is Donald Trump?
Absolutely. Dr. Avis, to me, it is so important to have this conversation and to have it from a candid perspective. And because these issues and these things that we are talking about, especially inclusion, if we just talk legally, okay? 1963 was when the Equal Opportunity Employment Act was signed. We're talking about almost 60 years, and Black women's pay has even decreased and now is at 58 cents on the dollar.
Yes.
So this idea around inclusion, this idea around diversity, this strategy and the ways that people have approached it have not been done from, in my view, right, the perspective of leadership that's really going to get us anywhere.
Right.
So what I see is that we need leaders to step up and meet the moment in a way that they haven't. We need leaders that want to go from leader to legend. And I think one way, right, to capture, the momentum of what we need to do to really make meaningful and measurable progress is we have to dump DEI because it doesn't work. Diversity, equity, inclusion as an industry, as a sector, as an effort, it hasn't worked. Because if so, why would I, if I was still working in corporate America, right, be getting paid 58 cents on the dollar?
Right.
It hasn't worked. So we have to meet this moment. We have to step up. We have to level up into a new way that we lead and go to looking at the heart of it. And I believe that the heart is anti-Blackness. And we have to alleviate anti-Blackness to really drive that true inclusivity that we're looking for. But that starts with dumping DEI as it stands right now.
Oh my God, that is a powerful notion, dump DEI, because we have as a nation really been sort of invested as that is the sort of take that we take, particularly in corporate America, and particularly supposedly addressing these challenges. But we still have challenges with that, right? So Amy, when you're working with organizations and you're helping them formate more inclusive strategies, what do you see are the key things that organizations are still sort of tripping up on? And what do you think is the best way they can finally meet this moment?
So I think organizations and organizational leaders need to be very clear about, on the one hand, who do they want to include in their organizations, and they do that by establishing a culture that's values-driven, mission-driven, right, and then cultivating that kind of culture. The problem is most companies don't know either who they want to include or who actually feels included.
Boom.
And so what I do is I bring a quantitative approach that helps them see what's the overlap. Ideally, the people that you want to include and the people you feel included would be the same population, but that's not always the case.
Wow.
And when we know what that difference is, we know how to close that gap.
I love that you're saying you bring a quantitative look at this, because I think one of the jabs at DE&I is that people argue that there's a lot of maybe feel-good stuff that they feel as if companies are promoting, but is it really moving the needle? So is it important then to make sure that we can actually put numbers to what the impact is of those action items? And if so, how do you quickly do that, Amy?
Well, that's the only way to drive accountability for your leaders, is to tell them what you're going to measure and hold them to those measurements. Set targets and then do the work to get there.
Boom.
And, I always tell my audiences, either at corporate events or in conferences or when I'm doing my coaching, that your heart can't be in the right place if you never move your feet. But if you don't know where you stand, you don't know how to get to where you want to go.
Well, that's a drop the mic moment if I ever heard one. And Vonda, to me, what she's talking about here is what you allude to, the need for not just leadership, but legendary leadership. How would you suggest that managers or leaders in organization make that pivot from not just being a quote unquote leader, but to making their leadership legendary?
Right. So first and foremost, Dr. Avis, this really has to start with that leader looking inside themselves. And they have to do that, right, from some deep places. And I think one of the reasons that we're seeing the great resignation, quiet quitting, and all of that other stuff is because leaders, often they don't continue to develop themselves over time. They don't continue to grow. They don't do things like participate in ongoing evergreen mentorships programs, right? Or have sponsors or take ongoing training, because once you've gotten to a decision-making point, especially at the level of like clients and people that we work with, right, at that C-suite level, you kind of think you've had it, you know it all.
Right.
You kind of think you've arrived. And so I think that looking at what legendary leadership looks like, looks at what you want to be, what you want your legacy to be. But in order to know that, you have to know who you are deep down inside. So I use a couple of little acronyms and things, within my blueprint. But one is, as a leader, you have to look at your BIC. If you think about the old pen, BIC, right? So I think your BIC is your beliefs, how your beliefs impact how you show up in the world, and that's your character. And so what is the character of leadership that you want to leave? What is that character that's going to be legendary, that your children and your grandchildren, your colleagues and friends, right, and people that long after you have left this, earthly condition are going to say about you? And I think I want to be known as a person that tried to do something, that tried to make a difference. And for me, alleviating anti-Blackness is going to be that thing that helps drive that inclusive leadership. Because the thing is, the reason that leaders aren't inclusive, I don't think they purposely say, well, I'm not going to hire Black women because I know they're super smart, right? Whatever, that's dumb, right? Yeah. It's because they are not thinking through what the decisions and the actions and the things I'm doing today, how does that show up later? How does that show up in my legacy? Like, I think a lot about my daughter, and from the time she was born, what did I want her to think and believe about me in terms of the relationship to the world and what I choose to do. And so I want to be known as somebody that made a difference in the world. And for me, that's all about legendary leadership and moving from just being a leader to moving to that legendary status.
I love it. And so if I were to wrap up by asking you to just one quick reaction or one quick tip that you could give organizations out there to be better, what would that tip be, Vonda, starting with you?
I say you definitely, Dr. Avis, you have to level up and you have to be willing to go deep and be uncomfortable. And so what that means is if you really want to meet the moment, you need to do that in meaningful and measurable ways. And I think that is very supportive and helpful when you have strong mentorship in place.
Awesome. Amy?
And I would say that a lot of times we get so hung up as individuals on the obstacles that we face. And I think it's way more important to look back behind and see who we've left behind, who hasn't gotten to where we are, and how do we clear some of those obstacles we didn't see along the way so we can all move forward together.
I love that. Moving forward together. Great takeaway. With that said, we'll see you next time on Max Black.